Before we begin, I invite you to gently close your ears and focus on what remains when all external sounds fade away. It's like sitting in a quiet room, and after a while, you notice a subtle ringing or hum beneath the silence. If you listen closely, you'll start to experience this soft, constant presence, something that feels like the very fabric of reality itself. In quantum physics, it's said that everything is connected at the most fundamental level, and that everything we see is just a manifestation of deeper, unseen energy. What you are hearing, or rather feeling, is that same energy, that same field of potential. This subtle ringing is what we call the sound of silence. It's not just an abstract concept or some external force. It's the very essence of you. Everything we discuss in this session, and the ones to come, will be about this sound of silence. It is not something separate or different from you. It is you. This exploration is about realizing that the sound of silence is your own inner being, your most fundamental nature, the stillness from which all life arises. You are that, the very presence behind everything. The soul is a concept that transcends physical boundaries. In contemplating its form, structure, and even sound, I've come to realize that these terms, while useful in trying to express it, ultimately fall short of truly describing what the soul is. It cannot be confined to any single form, structure, or sound. The essence of the soul is beyond our ordinary experiences and definitions. I have often wondered if it is possible to capture its nature through language or scientific terms, but what I have come to understand is that the soul defies such limitations. When people try to describe the soul or the supreme reality, words like omnipresent or eternal are often used, but these words still don't quite touch upon the soul's true nature. These words give us clues, but they don't fully explain. One analogy I've often thought about is the way sounds are identified. If I were to make a noise, let's say in a language that is unfamiliar to everyone around me, people might mistakenly identify it as belonging to a language they recognize. For instance, I might make a sound that could vaguely resemble Chinese, even though neither I nor anyone else around me speaks Chinese. This does not mean the sound is inherently Chinese. It just bears a resemblance to something we recognize. This is how I think about the soul. While it may appear in forms that we think we understand, its essence remains beyond our perception. It is similar to a sound, yet not a sound in the way we typically understand it. Just as my made-up noise might be misinterpreted, the soul cannot be confined to any one label or language. I've come to understand that when we seek to define something so abstract, we are often left silent. In ancient scriptures and teachings, people spoke of the ultimate reality, Brahman, but when it came time to truly explain it, they fell silent. The silence wasn't an absence. It was the recognition that some things cannot be expressed in words. This silence, I've realized, is not void, but the recognition that the soul, or Brahman, cannot be confined to human language or concepts. Even in scientific terms, when we try to discuss the nature of the universe, quantum physics presents the concept of the zero-point field, which aligns with some spiritual understandings of the soul. The zero-point field is the idea that at the most fundamental level there is a field that exists without any gaps or empty spaces. This aligns with the idea of the soul, which is ever present and permeates all things. But science, as it currently stands, cannot truly grasp this field as spirituality can. In trying to comprehend the soul, I recognize that it is not something that can be defined by physical properties. The soul is not defined by the changing nature of our physical existence, nor by our thoughts and emotions. These things are temporary. The body changes, grows old, and eventually perishes, but the soul remains unchanged. I've realized that when we inquire into the nature of our true selves, we begin to peel away the layers of illusion that bind us to our false identities. The mind, the body, the emotions, they all come and go. What remains constant, what survives beyond them, is the soul. This journey of self-inquiry is about recognizing that the temporary aspects of ourselves are not who we truly are. We are not the body. We are not the thoughts. We are the soul, the eternal, unchanging essence. The process of self-inquiry is often referred to as viveka, or discrimination. Viveka is the ability to discern between what is temporary and what is eternal, between what is real and what is illusory. I find that as I engage in this inquiry, I begin to shed the illusions that have held me in bondage. The more I reflect on what I am not, the closer I come to understanding what I am. When I contemplate the impermanence of the body and mind, I begin to realize that I am not bound by these forms. The body will age, thoughts will change, but the soul will remain. The soul is the unchanging reality that exists beyond all physical forms and mental fluctuations. This understanding brings me peace, for I know that no matter what happens to the body or the mind, the soul will remain untouched. In this process, I find that I must discard all things that are not truly me. As I let go of attachments to the physical world, what remains is the true self, the soul. This journey, while deeply personal, is something that every person must undertake in their own way. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Each person must look within and find their own truth. But the process is the same for everyone. It's about shedding the illusions and discovering what remains. As I let go of all the things that are temporary, I find that what remains is something eternal, something that cannot die, something that cannot be destroyed. I understand that this realization is not always easy. It requires deep inquiry, self-reflection, and a willingness to let go of everything I thought I knew. But as I continue this process, I find that the truth reveals itself. The more I reflect on what is temporary, the clearer it becomes that the soul is permanent. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am the soul, and this soul is beyond death. The body may perish, but the soul will live on. This understanding of the eternal nature of the soul brings a deep sense of peace. It helps me see that no matter what happens in the external world, I am not subject to it. I am not bound by the limitations of the body or the mind. The soul is beyond all of that. It is eternal, unchanging, and free. As I reflect on this concept, I begin to see that the soul is not something that can be measured or quantified. It cannot be captured by the tools of science or language. The soul is beyond the reach of these instruments. It exists in a realm that is beyond our comprehension, and yet it is present in everything. This is the paradox of the soul. It is both everywhere and nowhere, visible and invisible. It is the essence of all things, and yet it cannot be seen with the physical eyes. It is felt with the heart, known through intuition, and experienced in moments of deep stillness and silence. I've also realized that the perception of sound and silence plays a role in understanding the soul. Our senses are limited, and we can only perceive sounds within a certain frequency range. There are sounds that exist beyond our hearing range, sounds that are too high or too low for us to detect. This is similar to the soul. It exists beyond our ordinary perceptions. Just as we cannot hear the full spectrum of sounds, we cannot fully perceive the soul through the senses alone. The soul transcends these limitations. I've come to realize that the sound of silence is not a sound at all, but a vibration, a presence. It is the deep stillness that lies beneath all the noise of the world. This silence is not an absence. It is the presence of the soul. When I tune into this silence, I feel connected to the eternal essence that resides within me. It is a presence that is always there, waiting for me to recognize it. The more I listen to this silence, the more I understand that it is not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be embraced. It is the presence of truth, the essence of the soul. And as I become more attuned to this silence, I find that it brings me peace and clarity. It helps me understand that the soul is not subject to the fluctuations of the mind or the body. It is beyond all of that. I've come to understand that in this silence I can hear the truth of who I am. This silence is not empty. It is full of meaning. It is the sound of the soul, the presence of the eternal. And as I sit in this silence, I feel a deep sense of connection to everything around me. I realize that I am not separate from the world. I am the world. The soul is present in all things, and it is through this recognition that I come to understand the interconnectedness of all existence. This realization is not an intellectual understanding, it is an experiential knowing. I cannot describe it fully in words, for words can only point to the truth. But the experience of the soul, the experience of the sound of silence, is something that transcends language. It is something that can only be felt, known, and experienced in the deepest parts of my being. It is the truth that lies beyond all appearances, beyond all concepts and beliefs. It is the eternal presence that is always with me, always guiding me, and always reminding me of who I truly am. This understanding has brought me a sense of peace and fulfillment. I no longer feel the need to seek outside of myself for answers, for I have realized that the truth lies within me. The soul is not something I need to search for, it is something I need to remember. It is the essence of who I am, and it has always been there, waiting for me to recognize it. And as I continue on this journey of self-discovery, I find that the sound of silence becomes clearer, more distinct. It is the voice of the soul, and it is always with me.